Okay.
I think I need share screen ability as well. Again, sorry, because I
Oh,
punched out.
oh, right. Yeah, of course. Of course. Okay.
All right. So hello, thank you for having me. WIA. Is it WIA or WIA? I don't know.
We usually call it WIA. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Thank you, WIA, for having me. My name is Alan Lau. I'm going to present myself and also provide a little bit of advice about the animation industry, a little bit of guidelines and just experience from what I've had. So what I'll do is I'm going to share a little bit of a deck and share a little bit of video as well. All right, so getting into it. Can everybody see this here?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so um, going through this, uh, sort of had this roughly timed out. We're already late, but it's fine. So introduction, little backstory, talk about the animation industry overview, kind of like a broad generalization of animation. I'm gonna talk a little bit about some inspirations I have that maybe people aren't aware of, and then I'll break a little bit in the middle and talk and have a little Q&A if people want to ask questions. And then I'll kind of go more into portfolio tips and parting advice, which are probably things that at people here as students may want to know. And then again, I'll leave it open for some Q&A and then call it done. So that's sort of the general idea of what I'm putting down here. This can go faster or slower. You just let me know what you prefer. All right. So getting into it, my name is Alan Lau. I have 25 years experience in animation, which is a long time. I am a dinosaur. Creative director, animator, storyboarder, comic creator, and designer. So I kind of do it all at this point. Um, Most of my experiences is in linear animation, which would be sort of like what you would watch on Netflix, streaming content, things like that. However, I also have a lot of experience in game animation where you would produce animated loops, interactive animation, things like that. I've worked for Lucasfilm, Marvel, Disney, Pixar. Technically, that's all Disney. Sony, Netflix, Warner Brothers, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and many, many more. Um, I'm also a studio runner. I've run my own studio called Ghostbot, which I'm a co-founder of, and been doing that since 2004. All right. So background, I'm going to do a little backstory here. I'm going to go college, early career, and studio. Kind of cover those little points. So going back into the time machine for sure on this. So background, parents on the left here. Those are my parents back in Hong Kong, and they immigrated to the United States in San Francisco Bay Area in the 60s. I was born in the 70s, and this is not a cool Instagram picture. This is how pictures looked like in the 70s. That's me wearing probably my brother's suit. That's why it's so big. Um, so I grew up in the Bay Area, San Francisco, lots of fun. I was born here, but from an immigrant family. So I kind of got to see both sides of that a little bit, which was really interesting. Um, Being an immigrant family kind of gave me a super work ethic. I would say that's the one thing kind of being in there. And for them, for immigrant family, the big focus is like get into college, get into college, get into college. And I'm like, why do I have to go to college? And they're like, just get in there. I know it's good. That was just sort of the attitude they had, right? They don't know what it is, but they know college is good. That was the general vibe. So I got into college. I went to City College first, which is a community college. And then after 2 years, I transferred to San Francisco State University, which is not known for animation too much. It's actually more of a business school. They do have an animation department, but it's more of a business school. So while I was there, and growing up, I love drawing. I love watching cartoons and drawing. Probably like a lot of you, I would just sit in front of the screen and just draw. Um, but I was resisting it to some degree in college. Parents wanted me to kind of do something a little more practical, like be a doctor or a lawyer, something like that. So I tried, honestly, I did try to do everything and failed utterly at everything. Like I was not good at, you know, math or science or anything. The only thing I was good at was art. So once I sort of honed in on that idea, like I'm only good at this one thing and I do love it. Um, I remember my brother said this one thing to me that was very pointed. I said, how hard it would how hard is it to get into animation? And he's like, and he had no experience in this, but he's just said, oh, it's probably 1 in a million. That's what he said to me. And he didn't know. But that idea stuck in my head as like, ooh, 1 in a million, meaning it's difficult. Um, because it was so difficult, I decided to just work really hard to try to get in, try to figure out how to do this. So I think that's where the sort of immigrant background kicked into overdrive, where it's like, hey, I can work hard. I'm sort of from a working family. I use that attitude to sort of push forward into learning a lot about animation. So that was a big push for me there. And at school, in college, I don't know how it is for you at school, but for me, it's the class started with about 40 people, kind of crammed in, then it kind of cut down to about 30. And as the semesters went on, it cut down to about 15. And then it got down to about eight people, and those eight people did end up getting jobs at the end, that's sort of what happened. But it's sort of like that drop off of like the people who sort of stick around all the way to the end and work hard were the ones that we were able to barrel our way into the industry, so to speak. Early career. So I worked on a few things, probably things you grew up. You've probably have seen something in some of the stuff in your childhood. I worked on a show called Happy Tree Friends, which is a internet show. It's very twisted, dark, and demented, not for children. I've done stuff for Cartoon Network like Penelope Pitstop. I've also worked on anime. I worked for a studio called Madhouse. They're most notably known for working on like Vampire Hunter D and Death Note back in the day. I worked on a show called Gungrave, which was based off a Sega IP, I believe. And I also worked on developing animation for the Leapster, which is it was sort of a pre-K Game Boy. So you would basically, you could give it to a young child and they could learn ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Funny enough, I was working on the Leapster and Happy Tree Friends at the exact same time. So like in the day, I would be teaching kids ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. And then at night, I would be like decapitating teddy bears. So it was just like a really twisted kind of lifestyle I was leading. But having lots of fun just doing animation. The animation I got into was 2D animation. Now, I studied both 2D and 3D at school. And then the timeline, just to think about it, this is just around the time when Toy Story hit big. So it was like 3D was starting up and 2D was sort of starting to go down. That was sort of the sea change of when I started in the business. The um, the reason I got into 2D instead of 3D was really just the application process to some degree. You just go out when you get out of school, you just fire off like, okay, here's all the resumes and then all the subsequent rejection letters that come back to you. And then, the 2D people hired me first. So that's sort of why I ended up in 2D and not 3D. Not because of a desire necessarily. It just sort of happened. As things went along, I thought it would be fun to start a studio. So in 2004, I started a studio with my good friends, Brad Rao and Rocky Ballesteros. It's called Ghostbot.com. And I want to break from the slides from a little bit here. I'm going to show a little bit of animation for folks who haven't seen it. I'll show this. This one's nice. This is like a montage reel. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. But yeah, that's a little bit of work from Ghostbot. I'll play one more reel. Okay, so that's some flashy animation done work with it's lots of fun work. One thing interesting about running a studio is you have the experience to work on so many things very rapidly. I think that was one of the big eye openers for me was like, oh wow, like one day you're working on, Snoopy, and then the next day you're doing like Pharrell, or Weird Al. It's like you don't know what's going to happen every day. So that's been the real fun part about running the studio Ghostbot. Another thing I would say that's been really fun is that I really experienced not just the artistry of doing the artwork, but also the business side of it. I don't know if that's necessarily fun, but it actually gave me a lot of insight of like how what people think about on the business side when they want to execute or create animation. So I think I'm lucky to have that benefit of the empathy, having empathy for artists, but also understanding, where an exec's coming from if they give a note and feedback. Um, but yeah, that's a lot of the fun in having a ghost spot. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about the industry in general, just as a quick overview. Um, the industry in general is broken up into, I sort of perceive it in these four sections, like streaming and movies could count as streaming as well. Video games, very big, and tech, new tech. Um, as we know, streaming, you can see stuff like Star Wars or like Bluey or like Attack on Titan. It's a variety of things. It's kind of awesome time we're living in terms of animation. For movies, I always think about The Incredibles and Spider-Verse, so I'm kind of my favorites. Um, but this is also, big business. It's kind of weird when you think about how people talk about the movie industry dying, yet Super Mario and Spider-Verse have made $1 billion in the box office. So I'm like, I'm not sure what's happening. Um, and then in games, which is really fun. And the game spectrum is so wide. You have these sort of Clash of Clans type games where you could play on your mobile. Then you got Baldur's Gate on the other side. So it's just an incredible breadth of things happening in video games. And it's triple A and indie and everything in between, which is something I absolutely love about video games. Um, and then there's tech, which is the question mark. I put the Vision Pro up here because it's the newest thing that's coming out, or that is out now. But I think tech will always push art to some degree. Like if you track back to when, the phones were created, that's when suddenly like, oh, we need apps for this thing. Like, oh, what's an app? Or we need games for this thing. Like someone's got to play tic-tac-toe. It's like, well, someone's got to make that art. So I feel like technology, especially consumer technology, will drive art and creation. So always be mindful of that. So maybe Vision Pro isn't the end all be all for technology. I don't know. Who knows, right? Um, but regardless, anytime someone takes a big leap and jump like this and people embrace it is when you can kind of see art forming around it. So just something to think about for new technology. So linear animation production is crazy. And I will break it down sort of in general of how it works. So we have executives, who greenlight projects. There's directors, writers, producers, designers, and storyboard artists. That's probably the roles that you guys are all studying for where you want to get into. It's the pre-production role, quote unquote, pre-production roles that we see a lot in animation. Voice actors, modelers, riggers. Depending on the animation style, there's modeling and rigging. For 3D animation, there's model and rigging. Sometimes for 2D, there's not. Sometimes for 2D, there is. So like, it depends if it's a 2D harmony show, like Bob's Burgers. You will find that, or Rick and Morty, you will find it's kind of a blend of like traditional animation, but also rigged animation as well in 2D. Renderers, again, Bad Batch gets some great rendering on that. Music, sound effects, compositors. So it's sort of this a huge amount of people to produce very little content, which is kind of crazy. And it's a lot of work. Game animation production's a little different. It's similar but different. There's still executive directors. There's game designers in there. So that's a bit of a question mark. Like game designers are in there to determine what is quote unquote fun, which is to me is a very difficult job. Like I don't know how you could even imagine like running through a system or a loop and just making sure that experience is satisfying. So very challenging. But there's writers and producers and designers, storyboard artists, voice actors, modelers, technical artists, animators. I forgot I should include mocap artists in here too. So there's just a lot of different things, renderers, music effects, and composers. The problem with game animation production is it's a lot less straightforward. It's more like a spiral, or like a little bit more like everybody's converging on one point, which is the game. But it's not as straightforward as linear animation, where there's really tried and true steps that you stick to. And that's kind of been like the way it's been like that since the 40s. So I find that anytime a game is any good, it's kind of a miracle in terms of production, because again, like, how are you going to get all those brilliant minds to converge into one singular vision? So kudos to any game that does well. And comic streaming, movies, and games, requires a huge amount of creatives working together to make something cool. It's essentially a team sport. That's one thing that's challenging. I always say for artists, I would say there's always a little bit of an introvert for most artists. You want to just sit in the back and just draw and not get noticed and yelled at or punched. And I think that you have to resist that a little bit in the industry of animation, because you can't do it all yourself. You always need help with the final product of animation. So learning to communicate, learning to have empathy for your fellow classmates and coworkers is super important as you move forward in the industry. Inspiration. So since this is WIA, I wanted to bring up some of my favorite inspirations sort of from the female space. So creators I grew up with or admire currently in the industry. So one of my favorites is Rumiko Takahashi. I'm bringing up some that I'm not sure people have heard of, so I just want to sort of bring it out here in this conversation because I think it's super cool. Rumiko Takahashi is this amazing creative who created Ranma One Half, Inuyasha, and Urusei Yatsura. So she's most notably creating manga in the 90s and continuing onward. But she's one of these most popular manga artists in the world. Moving along, there's Hiromu Arakawa, who I just butchered her name, but she worked on Full Metal Alchemist, which is one of my favorite animes of all time. So super cool. Other people I want to bring up. Oops. Lauren Montgomery. Lauren Montgomery is a showrunner for Voltron. She also worked on Avatar, Legend of Korra, and some other really cool shows. She's incredibly talented artist and director. Another showrunner, Lauren Faust. She worked on My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. She's sort of the one that spearheaded that whole brand change, where she developed these characters into these distinct personalities and really pushed for the super graphic style. I mean, this is the best it's ever looked, in my opinion. But she's sort of known for this graphic style and great witty humor in her writing. So Lauren is amazing. Another inspiration, Vivian Medrano. It's awesome. I remember meeting her at CTN like 10 years ago, and she was just sitting there at a booth by herself. And I was looking at her art, and I'm like, good, like, holy smokes, she's amazing. Like, how come no one's noticing how amazing this? Can someone please look at this? Because she's amazing. And she was just sitting there like really modest, and she showed me, a little bit of what she was working on. I'm like, you keep going. Whatever you're doing, just keep doing that. And sure enough, years later, Has Been Hotel's just blowing up on Prime. So she is a superstar and super talented. Very, very excited about her. Other people I just want to point out just really quick, Mingju Helen Chen, great artist. You should check her work out. Shauna Mills, great director, storyboard artist. TB Choi, amazing visual development artist. Jennifer Yu Nelson directed Kung Fu Panda 2, which is my favorite Kung Fu Panda. Marge Dean is EP at Skybound working on Invincible season 2. So you have her to thank for that. Nancy Cantor is an incredible executive out of Disney Junior and now doing independent films with Craig McCracken and Lauren Faust. And Holly Edwards is running the show at Skydance Animation. So these are just some names of people that, just I'm just grateful to have remotely close in my orbit just to sort of say, wow, these are amazing. So I just wanted to put that out there in the world for you guys to sort of see that there's just an incredible array of incredible female talent in the animation industry today. All right. So let me see. Oh, okay. So I'm at the Q&A section here. I'm going to stop right here for a moment because I've been yammering, and I want to just take a moment to sort of answer any questions you all may have.
I wanted to ask you about like what are like the key differences between like the different industries? Like you mentioned like streaming versus gaming and like the similarities as well. Like where do they overlap? Like as like somebody looking to go into this industry, should I try and explore all of them or like what should I look for like that is similar to?
Hmm. Well, specifically for you, Elizabeth, you're looking into visual development and background. I would say that applies to everything I just mentioned. So, and especially when you're coming out of school, you're like, it's a little bit of beggars can't be choosers. Like, just get in there. You want to get the XP, right? So, wherever you can get it, get it. So, if it's a game industry place that's looking for cool environments, like you say, yes, I can do that. If it's a streaming place, like, yes, I could do that. Just go for it and see what you can get into. And I think you should be as open as wide open to the possibilities of what you could get into as possible, and then make something cool of it if that's possible. So, Adrian, I saw that you were raising your hand.
Yes, I wanted to be able to ask, since you had talked about technology being on the rise, and like with technology, there is of course the rise in AI art, AI video. What would be like some tips or comments that you would say to like the aspiring artists that are just entering into college or getting out of college to be able to make sure that they know that their work is important and that it will hopefully lead them to success? What would be some things that you would say?
Oh, wow. Talking about AI on a recorded video is going to get me in so much trouble. Um, I joke. I would say that for AI, it is incredible to see that, you know, like a couple months ago, you're like, well, that's interesting. And then like 1 week later, you're like, what? They're doing that? And then the next day, it's like, what? They're doing that? So you could tell that the technology is rapidly progressing and changing. And how that applies to artists, it's a touchy subject, to be 100% honest. I have a lot of artist friends who are very adamant about being very anti-AI, and I totally understand that. But at the same time, I have a lot of artist friends who are really embracing AI, learning how to use stable diffusion and learning how to use these tools like Midjourney. I am trying to just stay open-minded with the idea that, and I can't control the industry, I can only really control myself. I My thought on AI is you should just use it as if you could use it in a way that helps you to create artwork, that's cool. That's cool, but at the same time, you should try to, at least for me, I try to use it as ethically as possible. So I don't really like the idea of like typing in Midjourney and here's my art and then showing it to someone and say, hey, I did that. Like I don't think that's cool, because we know that Midjourney scrapes artwork from other people. However, the gray line is like, well, when you're looking to draw like a background, for instance, a snowy background, you may Google snowy background, right? So if you type into Midjourney snowy background and it inspires you, that shows you some things that you may not have thought of, that's kind of like a cool way to use it that may be, a little bit less um, sketchy. But again, it's sort of it's this is I would say this is an ongoing conversation about how AI is going to affect us. I'm just trying to be as ethical as possible when I consider using it, if at all. So that's just sort of how I approach it. Um, there are things about AI that could be interesting. Like I imagine, like could it give you like great in-betweens? Could it help you fill in crowd shots that you don't want to draw on a storyboard? Can it put your character on model? Like there's things about AI that I'm like, that'd be nice, when I think in my head. So hopefully, in general, I would say you should try to embrace technology as opposed to fear it more than anything. It's better to embrace it and understand it, even if you're not going to use it. I think it's better to understand it. In regards to art and how it applies to you artists, I know it could be frustrating if you're working your tail off on a painting and then you just see like people posting AI art on like X or on threads and you're like, why do I even bother? Like, I know that that could be a strong attitude as an artist. But I will say that, you know, in general for artists, it's pretty obvious to me when artists break into the business, why they break into the business. It's because they just are excellent. You know, they're really good at their craft. You know, there's a few people that are like, oh, you're just lucky. I don't know how you got in here. But for the most part, it's people that like, well, they kind of check off all the boxes of incredible talent. And I don't really think that even with all these technology shifts, I don't think the idea of creativity is going to go away. You know, it's not like you know, I don't think we're at a point with AI where you can have it like write a whole script for you, but it could help a script. You know, it could help punch up your resume. It could help punch up, you know, your grammar. So I think there's things like that as well. I just feel like, you know, being creative is still an important factor for everybody. I hope I answered it and didn't ramble too much.
Oh, no, you did. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I believe Sienna, and yell at me if I'm wrong, but Sienna, I think you had a question.
Yes. First of all, Alan, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. And as you talked about in your presentation, you've worn many hats over the course of your career. And for me, joining the industry, I'm focusing on storyboarding, but my goal later on is to graduate to a position as a writer and potentially in the future past that, a supervising director. When you rotated positions and you graduated to different ones, was that more so organic? What can I ask what the process was with that?
I think for me, great question. For me, you know, I wanted to be an animator like Glenn Keane. That was my goal. Like I wanted to do the Glenn Keane thing. So when I got in, they're like, "You're not Glenn Keane. You're go do some in-betweens." I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I would do some in-betweens and work hard. And then after a certain point, I did more figure drawing. Actually, it's funny from a career standpoint. I got out of college, and when I applied, I could only get jobs as an in-betweener. So I wasn't quite good enough to get into animation quite yet. So after a couple of years of in-betweening, I'm like, you know what? I want to I want to go into the animation section. So I actually went back to community college and I took the cheapest class I could of like figure drawing. And I just figure drawed for like a year nonstop, like a crazy person. And then I was good enough to do animation. And then as animation progressed, I got good at storyboarding. And then as storyboarding came about, I got into directing. So I would say maybe the best thing to do for you, if you want to go into story, to writing, to supervising director, what you want to do is first get really good at storyboarding, because that's sort of what you're going to be watchdogging the whole time. Even if you're writing or supervising director, you're going to be looking at the storyboard artist going, no, 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 don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. You're going to be doing that. That's going to be your job. So you got to get really, really awesome at storyboarding. So step one, just be an unstoppable juggernaut at storyboarding. Step two, I think this is where when you want to break out of storyboarding, you want to get into a bigger role like writing, you got to write, show that you can write, prove it, right? If you're in the business, it's a little easier to some degree. Like I think that first job, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be really hard to get. But once you break in, it becomes easier, because I think it's always a little bit of that trust factor. People are like, oh, I don't know, you're new, I'm scared. But once they know like, oh, Sienna's great. Oh, Sienna, you want to write? Well, can I see your samples? That's usually what happens. And you're like, okay. And you show some samples. So proving that, it's almost like a job interview while you're working at your real job. This may be how you could sort of approach the writing aspect of it. And as a supervising director, I think there's going to become a point in your career where they're going to look at everyone and go, oh, who could take responsibility for this mess? And they're like, oh, Sienna could do it. She could do it. And you're like, you got to be, when they're looking around the room, you just got to be like me, you know, be assertive. There's also, you know, in terms of being a director, you just got to be pretty chill. You know, I've had directors, I grew up with directors that were not chill, a little stressful. But for me, I found that in general, the biggest success is just like you're absorbing kind of a lot of stress, you know? So the artists under you are like, oh, I'm stressed because my art is bad and no good. I hate myself. And you're like, okay, I've got to absorb that. And then on the other side, you have clients that are yelling at you like, hey, I'm mad about XYZ. And you're like, I'm absorbing that. And then you got to like relay calmly in either direction, like things are going to be okay. So that's sort of a job as a supervising director. And then also making the decision of how how will these things be okay? Like, how do you comfort people and make sure that they do the best work they can? So cool heads prevail as a supervising director, hard work and in talent is usually what happens with supervising directors.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Mia, you had a question.
Yeah, hi. So my question is like, how do you like avoid burnout? Because for example, a lot of us are working that short film for our groups, and it's like we're in crunch time. And one of the fears is like you're working on something for so long, and you're just like, ugh, I can't work on this anymore. Like, how can you go forward? Be like, okay, how can I be productive? Go like not like be a procrastinator basically, and get the job done.
Okay, well, a couple different things in there. So there's burnout and then
Yeah,
there's procrastination.
yeah, or
So
a mix of two.
I'll address procrastination first. So procrastination, we're artists. I mean, gosh, if you just like, um, sometimes procrastination is good. Like if you're actually doing storyboarding, it's you're gonna draw to a point and and then your eyeballs are just gonna kind of melt out of your head. There's a good point where you should go outside and take a walk. Go get some tree oxygen, like absorb something else in your, sunlight, get a boba, get a coffee, something to kind of get your brain to unlock. I found that some of the best ideas I've had is when I'm doing something super mundane. Like I'll be stuck on a story point, really mad, and I'm gonna go vacuum the house, and I'm like, Eureka, I've got it, and I start acting something out, and my wife's looking at me like, you're an idiot. And I'm like, stop it, I'm working. I'm technically working still. So there's things like that happen. So break it up in your head, procrastination. If you get sort of blocked, if you're procrastinating, no, specifically procrastinating, like you really are just like hemming and hawing, schedule is important. So one thing that's super overlooked often in animation industry is the producers are like the most important people in the job, because without producers, it's like herding cats. It's like a bunch of animals, a bunch of crazy artists running around in circles, not paying attention. So you really need someone for any indie project to sort of take the mantle of like, I'm going to be the producer and I'm going to give you the Google sheet that has your name on it, that has your date of like when you got to get something done. And that has to kind of be planned out. So uh, I found that the fire of a good Google sheet or good Excel sheet is often in a date, in red is often what kind of triggers someone who's procrastinating to kind of get out of it. So scheduling, production, super important. And that's also something you really learn on your own projects here. You're probably learning everyone has different varying levels of success where you're like, yay, we're all getting everything done. And there's probably another team that's like, we're crashing and burning. And it's probably because of production. So be mindful of that. Scope is a big deal for student work. So I know everyone here probably has a 3-movie trilogy in their head about what they want to make, but this is not the time for that. I think this is the time to make the shortest, most awesome TikTok-sized clip you possibly can. Like, don't go crazy making a 3-hour epic. You're never gonna be able to wrap your arms around it with the resources you have. Even if you have a lot of help with students, it's much better to just put all that effort into like the best shot you could ever make, the best animation. Like if you're doing animation, it just can't be like a walk and you say, hey, the walk's done. I did a walk. See, I did a walk. No, that walk has to have character. Arcs and spaces have to be perfect. It should have secondary action. It should have, it should look amazing. Like it's out of a movie. Like you should look at that walk and go, well, is it my target? I want to get a job at Pixar. Does my walk look like it's in Pixar movie? Like that's what the HR person on the other side, when they're trying to hire people, that's what they're looking at. Now, you got to also imagine when people are looking to hire people, they have no patience. They have as much attention deficit disorder as we do. They basically will look at your work for like 1 second and go, you know, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one. Again, a large project doesn't help you in that space. It's almost like a shorter, more refined project is what will catch people's eyes. I'm sorry, I'm jumping a little bit ahead in terms of the advice. But those are things about procrastination, burnout. Burnout is really hard. I find that if you're working on one helpful thing is if you're doing a few different things on the project, if you're like storyboarding or designing, jump back and forth from one to the other, that might help the burnout. I I I've kind of worked crazy hours, to be 100% honest. Like I work definitely more than 8 hours a day, and I will honestly say that this job is not normally for the faint of heart. I'm not saying that it's fair at all, but I also say that in this industry, it does seem like it's extreme work conditions sometimes. I haven't figured out 100% way to solve it. When I hire people, I never force them into that situation, but for myself as an individual, I find it very difficult to not work a lot. And so I think it's a sort of an ongoing challenge at the same time. But I wanted you guys to sort of be aware that it's not a cakewalk, especially like when I would go to studios in Japan and visit them, I would see that the working conditions there are just so brutal, comparatively even to US standards. Anyway, any more questions? Did I miss anything? Okay, I will keep moving along. The slides here. Oop. All right. So, moving here, okay, so really quick for portfolio tips, and this is very, very general because everyone here is sort of doing a different thing, but I just sort of wanted to put this out there as things I sort of learned from portfolio tips. So, don't put aspiring. This was a funny one. This one made me laugh, but I guess it kind of makes sense where if you're brand new and you're coming right out of school and you're on LinkedIn or you're, in your website, don't put aspiring because that sort of automatically, puts a label on you that you may not want if you're trying to get a job. So something to think about. Even if you are aspiring, don't put irrelevant stuff. So this one's the more important note. I would say when you're doing a resume, cover letter, a portfolio reel, like you want to cater it always to the person you're gonna you're trying to get a job for. So for instance, if you're applying for a job for SpongeBob, you would want to basically put very cartoony things in your portfolio and put things that show that you can draw dynamically and draw cartoony and expressive and fun, right? But if you're applying for a job, let's just say for Arcane, you may want to put stuff that looks more like Arcane, which is like action, cool, edgy, So you really have to, unfortunately, and this is really difficult, but you really have to sort of custom tailor make every opportunity for that your artwork for said opportunity is basically what I'm saying. Number 3, cut the fat. So that's similar idea. It's like don't put irrelevant stuff. Don't put things that will distract again a person that's looking to hire you. You got to understand that when people are looking to hire, they're almost looking for mistakes. Sometimes they'll look at your reel, they'll look at your artwork, and they'll kind of scroll through and go, "Oh yes, oh your drawing A is cool, your drawing B is cool. Oh, your drawing C, that one's kind of weird. I'm not sure about you anymore." And then they'll just they'll drop you. So that's sort of how they react to when they're going through so many different artists. So again, try to be very precise about what you're presenting. 4, create a social media presence. This is abstract and difficult in my opinion, but I would say just definitely get your art out there. I think especially for the biz dev artists, in my opinion, if you want to get into biz dev, I find that some of the busiest biz dev artists have a huge social media following. So I think the more you can kind of just get used to the idea of putting your work out there, I think the better it is for your odds of like getting traction in the business, whatnot. And then today, I think a couple years ago it was really Instagram. Today, I'm not so sure anymore. I'm not sure if it's TikTok or something else. You have to almost also follow the trend of which social media platform people are using. Number 5, don't wait for perfection. So this is also a very difficult point to share, but worth noting. As an artist, especially studying art in school, I'm imagining that a lot of you are like, oh, it's frustrating that you can never really get perfect art, and that's true. But don't let that paralyze you also from just performing and doing your work and also progressing. And remember, you have to treat art a little bit like a progress bar. Like you may be you may draw a cool drawing on Monday, but remember by Friday that you could draw a cooler drawing on Friday than the drawing on Monday. So don't hold yourself up mentally from don't block yourself is basically what I'm saying when you're trying to be a perfectionist. So that's a little bit of the portfolio tips. So I'll put this for parting advice, and then we could do a little bit more Q&A. So parting advice, it's just things I've kind of learned. Definitely continue the work. This is a hard one also, but just worth mentioning. When you're in school, you're working really hard, and a lot of folks, you just work on getting your portfolio in order, and you're hoping that that's enough to sort of get the job in the business. And it's kind of not 100% true. Art is always progressing, and you're just, what you're going to produce the year after college will be better than what you produce in college. Imagine getting your first job in the business. You would probably learn so much, and then suddenly all the art you do from that point on will be better than your art in college. So again, don't feel like you just do your portfolio and stop and that's it. You just keep continuing to learn and progress your artwork. It's kind of annoying, but even to this day, I will take classes to learn things like I never learned. Like I want to take a class on Blender. I want to learn a little bit more about Unreal Engine. So there's all these things I kind of want to learn as an artist. So it never really stops. Number two, be aware of the bar. And I think this is super important as well. I cite the Pixar example earlier. If you really want to get into animation as in Illumination or Pixar, be aware of that bar, that super high standard, and reach for that. And again, it's easier to reach for that on a small clip of animation as opposed to a big old giant movie. So hey, if you do the best walk cycle on Earth or the best like pick up an object or jumping thing on Earth, that's better. You'd have a better shot at getting into the industry rather than stretching yourself too thin on something. But again, you have to be aware of that perfection bar a little bit. 3, network. So this is a big one. The people in this room right now is your network, is your support group. The people in your classes are your support group. They're the start of your network to some degree. So definitely look around the room at your friends and your colleagues and support each other through the process. I think that's super important. Again, I believe one of my first jobs was from one of those 8 people at school was like, oh, Alan, he's cool. You should talk to him. And then I went in and talked to the studio, and they were like, oh, he's okay. I guess we'll hire you for something. So that happens all the time. So what's likely to happen for you is that someone in your class is going to get a job somewhere. And then that person, you should keep tabs on them because they may be the one that helps you, at least not help you get a job per se, but at least help you get the meeting, to have a conversation about the job. So that's sort of how it works in general in the business. It's a small business in general for gaming or streaming. But the more people the more likelihood you're going to be able to get work. Show your work. That's a big one. Again, for all the introverts in the room, don't hide too much. Don't hide your beautiful artwork. Put it out there. Share it with the world. And if it doesn't click with people, that's okay. Just draw another one tomorrow. Again, don't worry about it too much. Number 5, this one slightly controversial, but I'll put it in there anyway. Again, I'm trying to be super honest here. Stay out of debt. So what I say about this, I find it really interesting with art that I find it strange with art that it costs so much to study art and to like get supplies for art, like computers, art supplies. Everything is so expensive, yet it's sort of a brutal industry that doesn't necessarily, we're not getting doctor money as artists, So I think I like to tell people that in the industry sort of flows from, it definitely flows in a wave. So right now you may be seeing a lot of things in the news, which is like, oh, animation jobs are cut, Sony cut jobs, Riot cut jobs. There's a lot of that in the air. AI is taking over the universe. Like there's a lot of uneasiness in the job industry for animation. But it sort of bounces up and down. So why I talk about finances a little bit is I think it's really important to be able to surf through those choppy waters in the business. And so the longer you kind of stay out of any kind of financial strain, the longer you could hold out for when the business does boom again. So that's just something to always think about as an artist, in my opinion. One great, I'm paraphrasing here, but one great note I saw was Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Hulk in the Avengers movies. He had said he had just gotten, I think he went through like 700 auditions and rejections, 700, and he wouldn't really quit. But a lot of that was just he had similar advice to staying out of debt because he had a really good support system of his family and people who, I think he took jobs to sort of stay out of trouble so that he could just wait for that one shot that got him, the big part in the movie. So, um, it doesn't happen overnight. So I think the longer you can hold out, the better. And again, sort of similar note, strive for quality, not quantity at this point in your career. You're at the start point, so just focus on perfection of just small little things is really the way to go. 3-hour movie, three movie trilogy later. For visual development artists, I think it's worth it to consider developing your own style. Sometimes in animation, you can kind of get caught in looking very samey, I would say. Everything looks a little bit similar. So it's hard because we're studying, Disney and we're studying anime, and you can kind of fall into these sort of tropes to some degree. But I found that if you could develop your own style somewhere within that spectrum, you can maybe punch through and people will be like, hey, I really like you for your individual style, So something definitely to consider if you're specifically going into biz dev. So I'm going to stop there for a second. Oh, I had one more. This is a big one. So the last thing to do is to intern. So I highly recommend that as a college student, it's really important to one of the weapons you have as a college student is the ability to intern. Oftentimes companies are looking for interns to help, and internships really blow up your network. If you can get an internship at a job, you suddenly become aware of the bar. You are networked into way more people than you ever thought you would be. You have to show your work. Depending on if the intern's paid, you get a little bit of money. And it's just a really great thing to sort of start your career. And it's something you can only really do when you're in college. You can't intern legally, you technically can't intern outside of college. So while you are in college right now, I highly recommend that you try to find as many internship possibilities as, opportunities as possible in areas that you're interested in. And the more you can get that, I think that definitely helps buff up your resumes and your reels and anything. If you get an internship, it automatically, from a hiring standpoint, you look at someone and go, oh, they interned at like Blizzard. Oh, well, I guess if they're good enough for Blizzard, they're good enough for me. And I think there's a little bit of that attitude when people hire. There's also like, oh, this person interned. That means they were, they were able to work with teams really well. So there's all these things, these check boxes from hiring folks that when they see an internship, it's a big deal. So definitely try to scope out those opportunities if possible. All right. So going to stop there, I think. Am I out of stuff? Oh yeah, I am out of stuff. So I'm gonna stop there and just sort of break for questions. Gabrielle, hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, Gabriel, hello. Is it Gabriel or Gabrielle?
It's Gabriel, but you can just call me Gabe. Everybody calls me Gabe.
Okay, nice. Hi, Gabe.
All right. Um, so when it comes to your studio, what do you look for in clients who you choose to work with?
For clients, I choose to work with. A lot of it is just sussing out whether, I think for clients, if it's a reputation situation, like if Disney comes and asks us to do work, then you're not worried too much about like, are they going to pay me? It's like a big corporation that has stocks, they're kind of covered. Or if EA calls me, you're not worried about things like that. But if it's a brand new company you've never heard of, then you're a little bit like, well, we need to sort of vet through and see if this is legit. So I look at these things for clients. But more than anything, for me personally, and this is a very personal choice thing, for Ghostbot, I really like to be able to look at the project and look at the client. Say, are we going to have fun? Is it going to be fun? Are we going to have fun working together? Two, is this going to be a cool project? Like, can we make something cool together? Those are two big factors for me. And third is the finance. Like, are we going to be? Is it not a project that's going to capsize either of us in terms of taking it on? So a little bit of money, a little bit of fun, and then working together on something cool. I really like working on. I'm a little picky at our studio. We don't work on everything. We'll just work on things that sort of align with our core beliefs, and that's in that way. Gabe.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to answer one on the chats. Do you have, Joseph asked, do you have any advice for that first interview in the industry? How do you respond to the what's a weakness you have question? Oh, that's so funny. So advice for interviewing in the industry, I mean, practice, we're in a funny space now that we're all living in this box now. So you can theoretically practice this thing a lot more than you used to. When you go into a job interview back in the old days, you would go to the studio and be super nervous. But now a lot of it's going to happen in here. So I would say record yourself, practice, see if you can make eye contact. Just check your own sort of like mannerisms when you're talking. Check the clarity, of your mic. Do all the AV check on your stuff. Make sure that all works. Have bullet points on the side, of your computer or post-it note or things you want to say. Sometimes job interviews really fly off the rails. So it is somewhat your responsibility to almost showcase the things you're good at. If they start talking about like, hey, we have something in common because we were born in the same city. That's cool, but it won't 100% show like, oh, by the way, I know how to storyboard and I know how to do 3D, whatever make sure they get those points in the conversation. Now the question, what's a weakness you have? The reason people ask you that question is they want to see, they don't really care what your weakness is. They're more curious about how you're going to solve that weakness or overcome it. So when someone asks me like, what's the weakness I have? I'm like, well, I don't know how to use, Cinema 4D. I don't know how to use Cinema 4D, but what I'm learning to do is I'm studying Blender and learning to use different software to sort of compensate. So things like that. So I think in a way, they kind of want you to just know that this person's malleable. This person's not going to just like take a punch and fall down. They want you to know that you're like, oh, I'll take a punch and I'll just roll with it like Bruce Lee and then just like, and keep attacking. So I think they want that vibe from you. Okay, Katie, you raise your hand. Oh, hey, Katie, you have a question? Okay, we can come back to Katie when she's ready. Any other questions or anything?
I had a quick question, actually.
Sure.
Yeah. So for when you were starting out their mic wasn't working, I see. Wait, I'll just continue my question and then maybe we could post on the
You could
chat.
type it into Katie if you can.
Yeah. So for when you were starting out your studio, is there anything that now that you wish you knew back when you were starting Ghostbot?
Oh, so much regret. You live and learn to some degree. I think that, I wouldn't change a thing to some degree because it just ended up to be such a fun experience to sort of go through that. At the same time, there's things you kind of understand more about the business that I would say when you're teaming up with someone, and maybe this will apply to you, if you're on a team project together, be very careful about how your goals align. So for instance, if you really want to produce a third-person shooter, but the other person wants to produce a platformer, then maybe you shouldn't be on the same project together, like that. Or if you really want to do something that's like adult anime style, or if you're someone that's really do cartoony, maybe you shouldn't team up on the same project 100%, you know, even if you like each other. So I think that's something I could say about just like making sure that your goals are always aligned. And I think that's at Ghostbot's best, we were completely aligned on things. That's usually when we were producing our best work. When the studio, when people weren't agreeing on things, and usually that's when things sort of branch out a little bit. So that's sort of what I would say in terms of just working as a team in general. But in terms of Ghostbot, I would say the big things is just understanding what the business is as well, you know, understanding the business of animation outside of it. So we were really brute forcing like, oh, quality work is sort of the way we're going to keep getting work. That was our psychology. Like if we keep doing the best of the best, then we'll keep getting hired. But that's not necessarily the case 100%. There's a lot of people who would just hire the cheapest studio out there. So that was something that we were always facing challenges with, where it's like, hey, we're a really cool studio and look at our work. Isn't it incredible? They're like, yeah, it's great. But we only got $2, so we're going to hire a studio overseas. And that was very common for us, you know, so, and how do you rectify that problem now as opposed to then? Like, well, if you think about it, it's like, well, maybe you should start a studio overseas or train a different team, you know, outside of the country that could help support the studio that you have in-house. So those are things that I would think of that would be beneficial now that I didn't know about at the time when I started it, you know, 20 years ago. Okay. So Katie, question. My question is, you mentioned taking on projects is that only in line with your core values as a group, and asked that when you are collaborating like that, how do you politely say no to projects or groups if you see your styles and goals don't mesh well? I mean, I think say it like that. You just be super polite. It's like, I love everything, but I know I'm not a perfect fit for every project. In fact, there was just someone that was just asking me, someone was asking me about a job at a gaming company in Canada that was like, you know, they wanted like a animation engineer. So I looked at it and I was like, okay, well, they need help with content creation. I could do that. Oh, they need help with animation vendors. Okay, I can do that. I've done that. Oh, they need help with C++. And I'm like, I can't do C++. Like I don't do that. And I don't do, you know, so once that became evident, I looked at it and I just politely wrote the person back like, hey, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, you know, but I don't, you know, to be 100% honest, I don't think I align with what you're asking me to do. So if there's an opportunity that fits closer to what you know, I'm good at, which is, you know, creative director, XYZ, I'm good at these things, then let's talk. But for this thing, I don't know. So what I'll do is I'll try to find someone that can help you do what you need, which is C++ stuff. So I'll go look for an artist that like has that sort of programming knowledge. That way, they can kind of you help them solve their problem a little bit, but you also can kind of back away like Homer Simpson into the bushes, like back away from that. So that's sort of maybe a nice way to do it. Again, being nice, super useful skill in the animation world. So that's maybe a good way to handle it, Katie, if that helps. It's funny too when you think about niceness. People never remember if you're nice, you know, necessarily. They just remember when you flip out. If you go crazy on the job, like there's, you know, if that one day that person has a bad day and they go, "Rrr," and then they just like flip the table. Everyone will remember that for forever time. That was just like, remember that time when, you know, such and such went crazy and they flipped the table? Yeah, I remember that. Like they always remember that point, but they don't remember all the times you're just sitting there politely being nice, which is a sad case of human nature. But yes. Well, great. Any more questions, or we could quiet. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I hope
I
this was
think, yeah,
helpful.
it really was. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, I think no, if no one has any other questions, we could, yeah, end
Okay.
the event. Yeah. But
Well,
yeah.
I will, oh, let me do a share screen of this. Here's my stuff. Email, IG, my comic. I'm working on a comic called Bulletproof Candy, which is on Tapas right now for free. You could check that out. in my LinkedIn. So again, networking. So, you get used to sort of sharing whatever you're doing with other folks and getting out there in the world. And then for that, let me see. I'll stop the share on that for a second. Stop share. Oop. Yeah. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. If you need me to review your portfolios or art, just reach out to me and ask. Oh, wait, there's a few more questions coming in, I think. Oh no, there's not. Hang on a second. Okay, good. So yeah. Oh, Vivi
Hello.
Angel.
Hello, Alan. Thank you.
Mhm.
I actually wanted to talk. I'd like to know more about your comic, the one that you just showed.
Oh
Can
yeah.
you tell us about what it's about and what your process was to create it?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I did gloss over that, didn't I? So, the comic is Bulletproof Candy. Let me get this up on the hold. Um, Shame on me for not promoting my own thing. Hang on one second. So, do, do, do. Mm, the comic book is called Bulletproof Candy. I'll tell you a little bit of origin story about it. Can you see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, so Bulletproof Candy is a comic book that it's an idea I've had for many, many years. And interestingly enough, it was born out of the need to create my own thing. So I don't think necessarily all artists want to create their own IP, but I definitely feel like I've been the type of person that wants to create their own stories. So I've had this idea for many years, and a lot of it was born out of just working on different projects and seeing them, seeing a lot of people like them, but I kind of wanted to be able to create my own thing that people can appreciate. So I pitched this idea of Bulletproof Candy, which it's a modern love story set against a post-apocalyptic future dystopia. Here, I did a little byline here. We follow May, which is a young woman barely scraping by, and she is trying to save her home. And she sort of gets paired with Greta, who is this sort of John Wick style assassin, and they go on this crazy road trip adventure trying to survive. And they, while they're trying to survive this road trip, this dangerous post-apocalyptic road trip, they start to have feelings for each other, and then it becomes a question of like whether they complete the mission that they're trying to complete, or do they sort of stay together and fall in love. So that's sort of the quick, terribly pitched version of Bulletproof Candy, which I just did. But I could show you some of the artwork of the said comic. How I'm trying to produce it is I the first thing I did was I decided to put it on web as a web comic because I think web comics is a little bit more of how people are looking at comics these days. And I thought it was a really interesting format. And at the same time, I wanted to produce every panel as a 1920 by 1080 uh, horizontal panel to some degree. And the reason I did that is I want to be able to cut this as an animatic later to pitch as a movie. So that's it's sort of a two-tiered attempt here. I'm trying to make a comic book and sell it as a story. At the same time, garner interest in it and then eventually pitch it as animation or as a film. So it's almost think of it as a previs version of what a movie version of this thing could be, is sort of how I think about it. I've had the ideas for many, many years. And one of the key things I did was when I started it, I was like, well, I wanted to produce it as animation. And once I realized how much it would cost to produce as animation, I'm like, we're not producing it as an animation. So webcomic definitely became a more inexpensive route to sort of get the idea out there. Now, the other challenge I faced was, hey, I'm not a writer by trade. But I'm going to try to write this thing because, what the heck? And I quickly discovered that I am a terrible writer, at least a terrible writer from scratch. So what I decided to do was instead of writing a story like this, I brought on an incredible writer named May Cat. and she's a writer on Transformers, Vox Machina, and Marvel IP as well. So she took a stab. I gave her that rough outline, sort of what I pitched to you, and then a little bit longer than that, but just sort of what I saw as the outcome for the story. And she took that and added her own story elements into it and her own flavor. And then we just worked together on the writing for a couple years. So that was the start of. So once the script was done, then the production of the art is really what sort of took the next step. So we've been slowly producing the artwork through, and now we're at the point where we're releasing the comic. And as the comic gets released on Tapas, we're probably going to release it on different platforms as well as we move forward. So, and in regards to the art style, it's not traditional. Traditional web comics look a little bit more. I tend to see it looks a little bit like shoujo anime or Korean, K-drama style artwork, anime style artwork. This one definitely has sort of a Samurai Jack, Bruce Timm kind of vibe, and it's sort of my default setting for the drawings. But yeah, and again, I think I'm drawing it in a way where I'm imagining it as animation. So I think I think people kind of pick up on that vibe a lot when they look at the artwork here. But again, what I did was this comic is completely free on Tapas to read. So you can definitely just hit the link and just enjoy it and check it out. You could read the whole thing. And yeah, my hope again is down the road it becomes. Jump to another section here. My hope is that it sort of becomes enough. We get enough eyeballs on it to enjoy it, support it, and then move it into something like animation or live action. That would be my cherry on top dream if that happened down the road. Understanding that these types of things take a long time. So for IP creation, it took me years to think about the idea, and then it took me years to write it, and now it's taken me years to draw it, and now it's going to take me a couple of years to promote it. So it's a long haul for IP creation. But you have to really, speaking of burnout, you just have to find ways to be really satisfied for what you do and enjoy it at the same time. So I've definitely enjoyed the process of doing this comic book. Anyway, there you go. Stop share there. Cool.
To keep that consistency and when you're publishing your comics, how far ahead do you have them ready before you actually publish them?
So every comic's different, and different successes. Like one of the biggest successes in webcomics recently is Lore Olympus, which is a really beautiful comic book. I don't know how they do it, but it's super cool. For me personally, I had the 140-page movie script. Now a script page in movie form is like you gotta, or even in script form for TV, one script page is 1 minute. So 147 is 147 minutes. That's a rough ballpark. Not accurate 100%, but kind of close. So with that in mind, I did about 50 pages before I started releasing it. And I wasn't planning on releasing it at all, but I was talking to my friend Ken, who is the creator of Happy Tree Friends, and he's like, just put it out there, man, just do it. And I'm like, all right. But once I put it out, I had this twitch of like nerves and maybe a little regret that I'm like, oh man, the clock is ticking now. Now I can't stop. So now I'm constantly just trying to stay in front of the train tracks, so to speak. I feel like there's a scene in The Wrong Trousers, Wallace and Gromit, where Gromit's on the train, the toy train, and he's putting the tracks in front of the train. That's basically me now, like an idiot doing that. But I would say whatever for comics, it's similar to YouTube, where the more content you have, the more attrition, right? You sort of like feed the algorithm, like, here's all the gravy to consume as much as you want. I think that's the way the webcomic works too. So the more consistent you are and the more you release steadily, I think the better chances you have of people catching onto it and enjoying it. I think if you have a huge break, people naturally tune out of a comic, and maybe the algorithm or whatever the search engine is not going to like support you in any kind of way. So I would say plan ahead, try to bank as much as you can. That way you're just not feeling that stress of putting the train tracks down, But I will say comics is incredibly a lot of work. I know animations in a way, you can produce a comic more solo or with less people. That's entirely possible, but it's still a tremendous amount of work. And you get really good at like, you get good at things you may not have thought you had to get good at. Like for me, it was like, oh, drawing cars. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have put cards in the story. It's so much work. This drawing cards is like totally hard. Or drawing backgrounds, and not necessarily my strength, but you get used to drawing backgrounds or coloring, so there's all these things that kind of force you into like a super artist when you do comic books, which is fun. Or torture, depending on your point of view.
Okay, thank you.
All right, cool. Well, I think sounds like we're wrapped up.
Thank you so
Again,
much.
feel free to reach out to me, ask for advice about where you're all going. If you need me to look at portfolios or whatnot, happy to do that as well. I was really honored to present to you here. Yeah, I'm excited about you're the generation that's going to produce the best stuff. So I'm excited about what you're doing next. I'm going to be like the Jon Stewart eating popcorn meme, enjoying what you're going to produce next, because I think the level of talent, like the art talent, has increased over the years. People, I think the competition's increased, but the level of quality has can increase too. And I think that's what you're facing a little bit in your world. But because of that, I think the content you're going to create is also going to be just vastly superior to what we're doing now. So I'm really excited about what you're all going to be doing in the future.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much.
We're honored to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Oh,
you.
if you could share the PowerPoint, or if you're okay with like sharing the PowerPoint that you had today.
Yeah. I will send it via email.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. For sure.
Please post more pictures of your dog.
Oh yeah, I'll put a couple pictures of my dog in the presentation as well. It's a corgi. The corgi. It's
Oh.
corgis are great, but they're a lot of fur. The fur amount is outrageous. I just had no idea how bad it was going to be, but it's pretty crazy. It's like a fur tornado, just like constantly in the house. Sad. But they're great dogs. They're great dogs. Okay, cool. All right, well, I'll wrap up, but thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
for
much for coming.
speaking.
Cheers.
Have a good day.
You
Have a
too.
good day.
Have a good day.
Thanks everyone for
Bye.
coming. Bye.
Wow.
Oh, we're still here.
Yeah.
Okay, I will end the meeting. Thank you for everyone who came. Yeah. Hi. 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 Oh, we just stay after class and office
Reflection.
hours. Reflection. Yeah, reflection. I'm gonna share
I did the
his
other book. That's
comic.
fine.
Yeah. Actually share his comic for our Discord. But yeah. Thank you for coming. Ending the thing. Okay. Bye-bye.